Today, we'll talk with Jerry Mitchell of Baruch College of the City University of New York about his work on AI and its implications for public policy. This piece will also appear in the so-called mini-series in the journal on interpretivism versus positivism. Is there a common ground? We have Giorgio Varanini here, my colleague at Humboldt, who I think this is the second time you've joined us. And we have Pobsook Chamchong from Chiang Mai School of Public Policy, and Piyapong from the same institute, Piyapong Boossabong. And last but definitely not least, Mandell from Empire State College, State University of New York. Need I say more? I think we could just turn it over to you, Jerry. Normally we have 30 minutes or so, and then we move into a discussion.
Can I share my screen? I think, can I do it?
Piyapong will tell you that.
Better slideshow, play from start, continue to share. Can we all see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so I think that we should be thinking about what is the role of AI in policy studies. Obviously, AI is going to play a big role in society generally. My focus, and I think our focus, should be on what role is AI going to play in policy studies and what is our response to the way AI is going to be engaged with policy studies. This is speculation because I don't think any of us know at this point exactly what's going to happen, but we need to initiate a discourse. And part of Frank's series was about what is the relationship between the interpretive approach and the positivist approach, and is there a role for those to combine, or are they really separate things? And I think that the more AI is involved, the more likely it's going to be that the interpretive approach is important. Okay, so the basic argument is that interpretive policy analysis is a ready-made answer to AI's positivist orientation. And the argument is that AI is going to be replacing the kind of positivist empirical research that has gone on, what you would see in the common policy analysis textbook, and that the interpretive approach is the solution, the answer for what we are going to be doing when AI is doing everything else. Okay, so that says there are really two approaches to how we can go about understanding public policy. One is the positive approach with variables and quantification, and the interpretive approach with social constructions and qualitative understanding. Whether or not that putting it in those two camps is too stark, maybe is an issue, but we'll approach it from that perspective. So positivism is a stance that the only way we can get knowledge is through logic, experience, and the scientific method. We need to boil everything down to some variables. need to stick them into a regression equation and then find out what the answer is. Furthermore, the argument is that the only way we're going to improve policies or society generally is through the positivist approach. Connecting that to AI basically says that this technoscience, which is what AI is going to enable us to understand everything, and then as we continue to advance it, it's going to get better and better, and it's going to make all of our lives just grand. We're going to live longer, we're going to have more rewarding lives, it's going to improve what we do. Okay? That's certainly the argument, generally speaking, about AI, but even if we were to tie it to policy studies. What is AI? Well, AI is a branch of computer science which is about creating systems that can perform complex tasks that require human intelligence, and it is replacement for human intelligence. It can reason, it can learn from data, and the way it learns is by being trained on data, and the more data it can be trained on, the better it's going to be. It's going to be able to make decisions. It's going to have some kind of like cognitive function, whether we think it has consciousness or not is another matter. And it's going to provide insights because it's going to be able to amass all this data in a way that no human can do it. It's going to use existing data as its method, but as it goes along, it's going to be able to marshal. It's going to be able to create data itself, in effect, and be able to know more about what's going on. So there's the group who thinks this is great, maybe not the Pope now, but the group who thinks it's great thinks that we're going to live longer, we're going to be more productive, that it's going to help us out. To do a variety of jobs, and that this is another one of these tipping points in human history in which we move from one mode of technology to another, and it's going to be better for us in the end. None of us were doing Zoom 20 years ago, now we're doing Zoom, and the argument would be that we're going to be able to use AI to do that. We could provide a long laundry list. The people who are selling AI obviously have a vested interest in making money off of this, and they are probably the biggest proponents of what's going on. So what is AI in policy analysis? Well, if positivism is about using data to understand things, that's essentially what AI is doing. It's going to be able to seek patterns. It's going to be able to come up with the meanings of these things. It's going to use logical formalism to be able to do it. It's essentially an extension of the positivist approach. It's a replacement for the positivist approach. And the argument would be that the people who do positivist research will no longer be doing positivist research because AI will take over their jobs. So what will AI do? Well, if you're a policymaker, whether you're in a legislative body or an administrative body, you're going to ask AI the questions. Instead of asking some person the question, you're going to go to AI first. Maybe you'll ask a person afterwards, but you're generally going to do that. You're going to skip the policy analyst, because why would you go bother to do it when AI can answer the question for you? That policy communities, whether you're an advocate, an administrator, a legislator, a chief executive, every level of government, internationally, doesn't matter what, you're going to ask AI to do all these things. Just as it is now that many people, when they're writing something, they go ask AI to make sure what's going on, have AI proofread what they're doing. People are going to go to AI. The people who practice positive kind of policy are not going to be able to stop them from doing that. And then we can make the argument that AI itself will eventually decide that it knows how to do this better than any person. And so the people who do it won't do it anymore. That's the argument. So just like in drone warfare, it's changing the entire picture of warfare. The AI is going to change the entire way we do policy studies. And if we think that, you can continue to do policy studies the way they've been done for the past 40 or 50 years, it's just not going to happen. No different than we're not going to be able to fight wars the same way, because as it is now, they plug in AI into these drones, and then the drones go and attack the targets based on AI scenarios. It's becoming AI driven, and it's the same kind of thing. We can make other analogies if we wanted to do it. Already, there are governments engaged in this. So Virginia is doing a review of every one of its regulations using AI. They're not having people do it, they're having AI do it. Japan has a task force that's using AI to compile policy information to how better use AI to drive innovation. The United Kingdom has a whole program about how to increase the efficiency of policies using AI, and AI informs them how they can go about doing it. The United Nations is using it to try to deal with disaster prevention, to monitor pollution levels, to develop climate-resistant agriculture. So governments are already going down this road where they're trying to do it. Okay, so what can't AI do? Well, AI cannot really understand the social settings for public policy. It can, maybe you can put some of that in, but it's going to be able to it's kind of crunching data like a positives. It can't do value trade-offs. That's kind of our thing. It's not going to be able to advocate for policies. Maybe people will draw up on it to make an argument, but you're going to have some people to do that. There's a problem that AI, when it ingests this information, is going to be ingesting information that's already biased, and therefore is going to reinforce those biases. And it can't understand nature-based solutions. AI is not nature. Can AI understand flower gardens, forests, things like that? Here's the argument. Interpretive policy analysis, which was created way before AI, primarily by Frank, looks at public policies in a different way. And my argument is that this interpretive approach, which started out as an alternative to positivism, is going to be the answer to what we're going to do in an AI world. So that interpretive policy analysis is now going to be the thing that all policy analysts are going to be doing, because they're not going to need to do the other stuff. The policymaker is going to need to understand the meanings of policies. They're going to understand values and feelings and the social constructions. They're going to need stories. And those are the kinds of things that interpretive policy analysis does. And that's what's going to be our role, so that we're shifting the responsibility from the positivist policy researcher to the interpretive policy analyst. That's the fundamental argument. What will the interpretive analysts do? Well, they'll do some policy ethnography. Can AI, maybe robots someday, but can AI go into a social setting and interview the people in the setting and observe what's going on? Can they form a narrative analysis? Well, maybe you can plug some stuff in, but to actually form a story, you're going to need people. Can they make policy arguments? Well, policy arguments are a part of the interpretive approach. The whole concept of policy ideas and how we think about ideas, how we think about emotions, from Piyapong's work on emotions, that is something is not really an AI kind of thing. If we want to understand the vibes, a lot of people talk about the vibes now about the particular policies. If we're trying to imagine different policies, that's something kind of beyond AI. So these are all interpretive kinds of things that AI can't do, that we can do, and that we will increasingly do more of because we're the ones that can do it. So take any kind of policy topic. If you want to do regulation, well, okay, AI can maybe survey all the regulations that are in a particular environment, but if you want to understand those regulations and their impact on people and how it relates to people and how people think about it, then you're going to need interpretive analysis. If we want public opinion about AI data centers, which is a big issue, they're being placed everywhere, well, what people think about them is really an interpretive question, not a positivist question. If we want to look at whether AI is going to destroy humanity at the end of the day, why some people think, then that's an interpretive issue. If we want to look at AI ethics, about how we use AI, whether AI is destroying democracy and things like that. If we want to understand whether AI is going to destroy a lot of our jobs and to talk about that, that's an interpretive discussion. That's not an AI thing. Maybe AI can inform a little bit of that, but not. And if we want to have people who are adept at doing policy studies, we're going to have people who not only understand AI and its limitations, but we're going to have people who understand the interpretive policy approach, which means that the focus of policy education needs to turn more to what interpretives do and less on the positivist approach. I think that people want an alternative. So there's a desire. I mean, the fact is, when people are going to these graduation ceremonies and talking about AI, the students are all booing them. And the Pope has come out as anti-AI. I think there's a whole flavor of people who believe that AI is not, they don't like it for a variety of reasons. And I think in part, the problem with AI is that AI is an inauthentic way of approaching life. And that people want authenticity. And here, to me, is where the interpretive approach comes up again. The interpretive approach tries to grasp what is authentic. And it tries to get meaning out of things, as opposed to just crunching some numbers. So whether it's building meaningful relationships, or cultivating trust, or breeding empathy, or connecting to nature, or improving our mental health, those are all kinds of things that people desire as AI becomes more prevalent. And my view is that we need ways to try to make things authentic. And once again, I'd say the interpretive approach does that. This idea that we want to untether ourselves from technology, whether it's opposition to the data centers, whether it's trying to digitally detox ourselves, or to create tech-free zones, or to go grayscale on our phones, or to engage in nature bathing, or have ecological thinking, are all efforts to try to respond to the overwhelming presence of these techno-science kinds of things in society. And so it seems to me there's a cultural drive that is getting us, that we need to think about how to do that. This is an aside, this is kind of me just talking about it, but I think there's a whole notion of a drive, the nature movement, a rights of nature movement. And one of the things that AI can't do, AI can't be nature. And it seems to me that the interpretive approach is a more natural approach, a more ecological approach, a more nature-based approach. It's more consistent with that way of thinking. And I would then say that if we need a substantive way of engaging, and this is the kind of the approach. You know, there's a new book called Eco-Civilization, which is to try to formulate a way of us to think about how we could be in a world that is more natural and less technical in its approach. So, a lot of nature and public policy things. See, I would have interpretive policy analysis have a nature focus to it. If it were me, I would say that we need to think more about public policy in an ecological fashion. I think we need to incorporate ecology into all of our public policies. I think we need to do that because we want authenticity and because AI can't do these kinds of things, whether all these policy areas that we could potentially talk about without getting into the details of them all. So, here's what I think the policy discourse should be about. I think the policy discourse should be about how to adopt the interpretive approach. And I'm adding to that rationale that it's a more natural way of understanding public policies. And I think that that's an argument, and I think it's an argument we need to play out. I don't think the argument has been played out. I think if we're going to think about what's going on with policy studies, that's what we need to be doing. And I will invite you to join with the discussion at this point, because that's all I have to say, except I always end with my dog because it's just a thing. Okay?
Okay. The dog. Okay. Thank you. Very well constructed, laid out argument. I have a point, but I don't need to be the first person. So the floor is open.
By the way, let me say it is an argument. This is an argument we're playing around with here. And I think it's a kind of a speculative argument about how we go about engaging.
Well, see, I would say that while it's an argument, it's more because in some ways, part of this is an extension of debates we had in the past, but it takes a new turn. It's accelerated. The debate over my years with positivism always pointed to this interpretive dimension. But they said, well, that's not our business. We give this information to politicians and they do that. They're the elected representatives or that sort of thing. Or we don't want to be non-scientific. We don't want to tell the dean that we gave up on science, etc. But what actually seems to have happened, so information is there, but it was extremely marginalized. And now we come into a period where it becomes more central, difficult to marginalize, and even more of than a challenge to positivism. It becomes, as you're suggesting, the alternative. So in some ways, there's a kind of continuity, a kind of evolution in which interpretive policy studies emerges and rises to meet the occasion. The interesting question also associated with that then is what happens to these former policy analysts who no longer have a job? I could imagine that the deans will say, teach them how to do AI, but this misses the point, right? But I could conceive of that as part of what could emerge that I'd be inclined to call a politics of interpretation. Who gets to do the interpreting, right? So we'd get a politics of this, which would probably include some variant of the technocratic perspective on interpretation, which would focus more on the facts speaking for themselves, if that's still alive. I think it is in many places, but however, that's what I was thinking about as I heard about that. Um, what would the policy school? The transition would not be easy to turn the policy school into a study of interpretive policy analysis. Um, that's a challenge, but I think there would be a lot of struggle around that. I don't know how it would play out. Maybe somebody else has some thought about that.
I guess, Frank, I hope this is connected to what you said. And thanks, Jerry, for this and for the paper. If anything I felt, especially in reading the paper, is that there are so many topics taken up in this relatively short paper, so many. And at so many turns, I said, whoa, this is a whole topic unto itself. And one of those topics unto itself, I think, Frank, this is connected to what you are saying that I wondered. You have a paragraph on this, Jerry, in the paper, but it's in a world of AI, what does somebody need to learn in order to effectively respond to a world in which we are embedded in AI? How exactly does that work? What does one do just in the educational realm to say, if we say that somebody needs to develop a more authentic or critical perspective, what is it? What kinds of tools does somebody have to have? What kind of way of learning does somebody need to be a part of to effectively respond to what we're so regularly embedded in? I think this is really difficult. And I think the question, when you point out totally appropriately, when people boo when somebody, at a graduation ceremony says something about AI, I think that just opens the question. How do we help all of ourselves learn how to respond? Or, I guess, maybe a little more abstractly, what criteria do we use to determine when AI is actually useful and what its limits are? How do we make that discernment? I think it's really difficult. And I'm so sorry, I'm going to say a very quick, somewhat humorous thing. I was on a discussion about AI last week where somebody was like railing against this. And somebody said to that person, did you do a Google search today? And the person said, of course I did a Google search today. And the person said, well, where do you think that information came from? So I think the issue about how do we see the boundary conditions and how do we learn about them is a crucial and really hard question. Thanks so much.
I
thought
think that one of the things that the interpretive approach at least gives us a framework for an approach that we can use, because we got to start. We got to start from somewhere, Alan. We got, we have to have, unless we throw our hands up in the air. And so I think that, we've got to find some approaches, even though if the boundary lines are not clear and if the topic is not, but at least we need a way of going about doing that we already have some experience with, as opposed to trying to find some new thing. I don't know what the new thing would be to counteract it. At least in policy studies, here's the other problem is, it's kind of hard to separate policy studies from the entire, universe of issues that go along here. But, at least for the people who are looking at public policies, got to give them something to hang their hats on. That would be my argument.
Thank you.
I think, Alan, that I'm inclined to say that these questions about the boundaries will be related to what I call the politics of interpretation. Who's in, who's out, how it should be done. That's just my guess about that. I thought in a way, Jerry, you were actually offering a set of criteria when you pointed to ecology. In some ways, you were saying that was the referential point for you. Of course, other people would disagree with this. You couldn't.
One of the things we have to be looking for all the time is what can AI not do, and and so I don't think we're ever going to have, AI is never going to be a tree or a lake or a stream or anything like that, and so sort of the nature-based approach becomes a kind of a lens from which we can do interpretation. That's an idea anyway. I don't know. I think we're going to be grasping for straws to find our way. AI is going to be over there, and what can we do, and what can we encourage that is better than that.
Other thoughts?
Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, may I jump into
Yeah,
this conversation?
sure.
Okay, because like I listened to okay, first of all, thank you so much, Jerry, to point to this kind of very important topic nowadays, not only for the policy studies, but for all the education that we are in now. But anyway, when I listened to Frank mention about the politics of the interpretation, so and also when Jerry mentioned about the AI and policy education. And that come to me about one thing that my experiences nowadays that I feel so lucky that I still got commissioned by the public organization to do some kind of like, oh, please find us the empirical evidence on this kind of topic because this is so easy and I feel like I can just use AI to provide that information for the policy maker. But then when it's come to design the deliberative forum, then using that empirical evidence to ask people or the actors that involved in that particular policy of interest to do this thing that challenging all the time. So it's come to the question that so what do you think it would be the future characteristic of the policy analysts or the people, the students that we teach to have this kind of the specific competency or characteristic like, okay, on one hand, for sure, they should be the interpretive researcher somehow. But do you think that to have this kind of the AI competency can also help them to be the equipped policy interpretive researcher as well, something like that? Do you think this kind of thing can be coexist and complement each other in some way?
Well, I think that the approach, or at least the approach that I take, is I would have policy studies be much more ethnographic in its orientation, I think we need to send students out into the real world and have them look around what's going on and teach them how to do that, how to observe things, because those are the kinds of things AI can't do. Unless we think that, someday we're going to be shipping robots out to look at and do interviews, which I don't even know if that would happen. I think that the kind of ethnographic based approach is it's the answer, which is an interpretive. It's kind of a component of the interpretive approach. I see that as the future. If you think we're going to be teaching students how to crunch data, they're going to say, well, have AI do that. I mean, so unless you want to say, we're going to teach them how to ask AI questions, which people think maybe that's an approach, how to query AI to get answers, that certainly is a component. But even that's kind of an interpretive thing about it, how you ask AI questions that give you the answers you want to get at the end of the day. So that would be my thing. I'd see policy education as being much more ethnographic, more anthropological in its orientation.
This would definitely change the curriculum.
I don't know how you're going to, convince students, to spend all this time doing it, and they're going to say, well, why don't I just ask AI? I mean, I don't, it's going to get at some point nonsensical it's going to be like, the point at which, it went from a typewriter to a computer, and, I think we're going to have to
So we could
confront that.
You could also wonder why then have policy analysts at all? The things that we're talking about that need to be done, the interpretive work, can be done just as well by an anthropologist, a historian. There's no particular core element then left that justify the program. And that's just an interdisciplinary thing. I think the person who can really interpret is the one who has a lot of knowledge about a lot of things, a lot of perspectives that come to bear. Exactly what you don't get in the policy school. You get the narrow empiricist perspective. Other questions?
I have a question or also comment. Thank you very much, Jerry. It was really, really interesting to read the paper and to listen to you. And also in terms of what needs to change maybe in the future and what we might need to change, and also in terms of how we work together in academia. I am thinking about publication and the way in which we communicate interpretive policy analysis, because the capacity of large language models to imitate the output of academic research, and here I'm not talking independently of the methods applied, this capacity might increase. So we might end up with AI that are able to imitate the output of a sound interpretive policy study without being an interpretive policy study. And so the question becomes, first, what makes an interpretive policy study so different from other forms of knowledge? But here I think that you were pointing, Jerry, also to ethnography and working also with qualitative data, but also together with the interpretation and with this interpretation of meaning, which is of course the quality that the interpretive researcher can bring in. But then the question also becomes whether the written texts become are still the first tool or the first mean that we should think of when we think about communicating interpretive policy research, exactly because these are exposed to this risk of being imitated by an AI, which misses the interpretative core and at the same time presents the output as if it was the result of interpretive work. So here we are really in an unexplored territory, but that's also something that your paper made me think about, and generally it's yep.
Well, I don't know. What are we going to do when AI, can essentially lie its way to? Oh boy, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't think, even if AI makes up its own interpretive story, that still doesn't preclude us from doing it, and doing it in our own way. And I'd go back, I think we can still do the ethnographic part, and AI can't. I mean, I guess my argument continues to be we need to find things that we can do that AI can't do.
Right.
And even if it can make up things, we gotta find a way for us to present things that are more authentic, more honest than what AI is doing. I don't know exactly how we go about doing that, but I think that has to be our mindset at least.
Jerry, I
think that.
Yeah.
Alan.
I just have one. I have one thought about that, if I could. I think it's connected to Giorgio's point, Jerry, and your response, which is, I guess this is a world I know a little better. In the world of like learning theory and adult education theory, this guy Jack Mesereau has this notion of a disorienting dilemma. And his argument is that it is in those moments of disorienting dilemmas that people, meaning that people realize that the way that they think, the way they understand, the meaning they give to something, their taken for granted ways of responding to it don't work. And it's at that disorienting dilemma moment that people are more likely to be open to alternative orientations. And without it, it's just abstract in some way. So I guess what hits me in listening again to Giorgio's comment and Jerry, your response, is that I wonder how interesting it would be if part of the teaching of this would be looking at specific cases where there are disorienting dilemmas. What is it that AI can tell us right here? What is it? And wait a minute, is that the fullness of understanding that we need? Does it add to confusion? Right there. So again, it's back to this boundary thing. What are the boundaries of what it can offer? And I guess what just hit me is if there were cases where the disorienting dilemma would be more likely to be present for students, it could help them in this process of thinking about what AI can provide and what it fails to provide, and what an interpretive perspective could offer that it can't. Just a thought.
I thought that Giorgio's point was really good. I would guess that the technically oriented people would assist AI in finding interpretations, offering interpretations, and maybe claiming that this is the right interpretation. I think this is, again, the politics of interpretation. I mean, speaking of disorienting moments, the world we're living in is a disoriented moment. And in many ways, if you look at Iran, it's a question to interpret what Trump is doing. And it's an open question, but one can argue this way and you can argue the other way. I had the most amazing discussion the other day with somebody who said that this was saving Israel from the Iranian bomb. Period. Didn't matter what the other aspects of this was going on, and we were just coming from a completely a different direction. So I worry that in a world of social media, that the AI interpretation could be widely pervade, and the question then is who believes what? And when it's things that touch your own life, it's easier to say, well, that doesn't work. But when it's a broader question about, say, what the Pentagon is doing, then what do I know? And it could be that AI could impose interpretations that that lots of people would believe. I agree with Jerry that I don't think there's any question about what we need to do and what we can do. The question is how to make people understand this kind of authentic interpretation, for lack of a better way to put it. And I think part of the problem of this is it has to do with the way of life and the way one lives it. If one confronts and is curious all the problems and ambiguities, then this will be a natural orientation. But if you're just a person who wants to get ahead, accept the dominant values of the corporate world, play the game, don't ask the questions, become extremely efficient in terms of implementing and so forth, that's a different way of life. But that's why I like the ecological approach, because that takes one. I mean, there's two arguments about the ecological approach. One could say that's positivist, but that's a false interpretation of nature. But if we connected ourselves with nature in the sense that we, for lack of a better way to say it, is that we connect with ourselves as part of nature. That is something that works here. But at the same time, this is also not new because radical ecologists have been making this argument for years. There are people who accept it and go off into eco-villages. But given the hardships, the inequalities, and the struggles of everyday life, the large masses prefer to, I would say, go along. I don't know. This is my thought. Piyapong, do you have a thought about this? Or what is your thought about this?
Yeah, I mean, in the part of my world, I need to accept that no one really care about efficiency. Policy is mostly about kind of elite preference. So with that, I mean, AI not really answer the question of authoritarian leader because they don't really make a decision based on efficiency or efficient choice. So for me, I think the role of policy analysts, especially in our context, is to understand politics, seek for the agreeable choice, reaching mutual understanding, build the consensus, or even confront the paradox or dilemmas that going on based on the context, based on the specific challenge. I mean, Pobsook also experience, we feel that we become more important now. Everyone need school public policy, especially because they know that actually it time to find someone who can do more on human touch, as Jerry mentioned, to try to find a way to make the legitimate choice for the government, not only the national government, but also the local government. And legitimacy actually not come from AI. It's not come from AI, but it's come from the stakeholder agreeable solution. And that's why we usually be invited by the local government to serve, to facilitate deliberation. It's not the same sense with the West, but let's say they usually ask the school public policy to support them to facilitate the process, to ensure that everyone agree, or at least let's say accept the policy solution that may be not the best, because no one asking for the best. I mean, in my context, efficient is not really the goal of policymakers. So that's the thing. I think AI might not work in the context that not yet modernization, I would say. And maybe I think it's very interesting now that when we're talking about agreement or even consensus, it's come from, I really like Alan mentioned about the importance of learning, connection, and even Jerry mentioned about emotional connection. Because actually, we're not really in the world that rely on factual evidence. It's not happen here, I would say. But how we gonna ensure that people gonna feel that solution actually work for them, or even acceptable for them, and that's still make us relevant in this world. And AI never replace us. And actually, the work with AI support, I even figure out myself that it's not add any value to policy analysts this day, because all of the policy decision is about value judgment. I mean, everyone know that, especially in the global south, developing countries.
Just to give you an example, I don't know, of what I do. So this is probably not in keeping with the traditional way of doing policy analysis, but I have students go into a neighborhood, usually their own neighborhood, a neighborhood they like, and they do a study of the nature in that neighborhood. And they ask other people, what would you like to have as the nature in that neighborhood? What would they feel like having? And so you're now in a setting in which that's not an AI setting. That's a people setting where the solutions are people solutions. Can AI maybe tell you about the history of it, the neighborhood? Sure, they could do that. Maybe AI could even give you a literature review if you wanted to go down that road. But if you really wanted to answer the questions about what it means, you're actually in a neighborhood thinking about it. It seems to me that we need, from a student standpoint, we need students to be placed in settings in which they can engage in interpretation. And I would probably think of all sorts of kinds of settings where that could be possible to do. And places that AI can't ever be.
Jerry, I if I could just say one little thing about that seems, I think, also connected to Piyapong's point. Maybe one of the one of the points of entry has to do with the question of the neutrality of AI. The assumption, just going back to like really old fact value distinctions, that AI has this kind of aura of objectivity, and thus it's never seen as value laden. Value laden is ask somebody their opinion about your neighborhood. That's assumed to be value laden. But the AI stuff is not. And I think it would be, I guess I'm going back to these kind of cases, to be able to show, wait a minute, the AI is only based on what that giant database of stuff that exists from which it can give its answer. It's value laden unto itself. And we have to break this connection between AI and objectivity and interpretation and subjectivity. And until we can break that, objectivity wins out in that discussion. And it's a false dichotomy.
In conjunction with that, I was thinking, and this is improbable, but if a line could be drawn that AI could assist medicine, engineering, planetary travel, interplanetary travel, but not relevant to social questions. In other words, to somehow delegitimate it in that realm, as part of our task is to argue that it is not an appropriate tool for these questions, to make such interpretations about the world. I think the Pope would go along with that. But we don't, well, I don't underplay the Pope. I mean, he made a bold statement there. But he was in many ways saying this is not the realm for AI, without rejecting it altogether. The problem is this old sort of technological juggernaut. How do you stop this thing?
Yeah, you know, the whole stuff about drone warfare is really because, you know,
Yeah.
most of that is being driven by, you know, they're using AI to do all their targeting. And obviously,
Amazing.
every country on the planet is now going to be acquiring drones and installing AI in the drones. And yeah, you know, it's hard to diagnose. Obviously, there's an interpretive question about how you use these things that are AI driven. But you know, your point that the technology is kind of overwhelming the, you know, everything else is, yeah, it's problematic.
Ukraine as our hero.
Yeah, they discovered you know, they discovered something, and now, you know, everybody's you know, everybody's going to be doing that, and it's obviously got
Except
interpretive.
Trump.
Well, you know, eventually the American military will, you know, have to latch on to it because they won't, you know, if they're not already.
I said Trump.
Yeah.
Yes. Any other thoughts? Anybody want to jump in? We're at the approaching the normal picking point. I would add one point that goes back to something that Alan said early on. I read the paper. I did find a lot of stuff going on in there. And what I was missing a little bit is the very clear presentation that you gave today. This was strong. And of course, the paper, by bringing in this and that and the other thing, which are not irrelevant, but somehow this strong argument, strong focus. I wouldn't say that's not in the paper. I wouldn't say that, but the sharpness of it didn't come through the way it did today. Something to think about.
Well, that's a problem when you have lots of people review a paper and you
That's
try
right.
to incorporate all the
I saw
views.
that. I saw
and
that,
and then
and
after a
I
while, it starts getting a little
it
mushy.
got blended down. I saw that. I saw that. I
Right.
thought, what a mistake. You might want to go back and sharpen up a little bit. None of those people are going to read this again, so you can kind of do whatever you want.
Jerry, I would say one
But it was a very
tiny
good
thing about,
presentation.
yeah, I would say one
Yeah.
tiny thing about that in terms of the paper. You tried to take, as we said, you tried to take up all these incredibly important topics. I think one thing that might help is a sharpening of the subtitle titles. I think that sometimes there's a genericness in the subtitle that doesn't crisply get at the discussion that's then going to follow from the subtitle. And I just thought of that in a couple of ways. Now, wait a minute. There's a better subtitle here that could really zoom in on what's going to follow. So anyway, just a teeny thought.
That's a thought. I've had a lot of people look at it, and the economists who I had look at it, they agreed with it. Actually, they agreed that their approach is being, they're being taken over by this technoscience, but they still want to believe in what they believe, and it's hard to shake that belief system and talk about it in a way that doesn't get too much into attacking that belief system. That's it, because this whole positivism thing has almost a quasi and like a quasi religious
Right.
thing, and even the AI thing has a kind of a it's a belief structure, and then when you start saying if someone's belief structure is wrong, you're getting into troublesome territory.
Maybe I also have a tiny comment on the paper. I mean, it's really great, and it's really feels publication ready. Just one thing I noticed is that you use the term thinking machine, and of course that might be, let's say, a poetic license, let's say, or creative license, but I would not necessarily use it in the sense that LLM we know they are not thinking machines in the sense that they work on plausibility and not epistemic reasoning, let's say. And so I think that using that term to some extent legitimate a narrative which is being, let's say, which serves the juggernaut of AI and LLM, but maybe we do not necessarily want to, or you do not necessarily want to subscribe to that. Just a tiny, because I think this expression comes up twice or something. So it's also something that you can really quickly change.
And a
Maybe
point about
just along that line.
point about Allen's boundaries. There's this guy who's written a book called Moral Boundaries, which he thinks that we should equate AI to animals. We should think about how we think about animals as how we should think about AI, and that there should be animal welfare for AI in effect, and that the boundaries that we find in the how we interact with animals is the same boundaries. In that sense, you're not thinking machines are animal-like machines. I don't know. It's an argument.
I thought though your reference to machine learning is
Right.
away from the thinking point that
Yeah.
Giorgio is pointing to. I understood the thinking machine, but there is a certain sense because we're in this open area, we don't really know what AI is, where it's going. Maybe it will become a thinking machine. Who knows? I thought, though, with regard to the economists, this is a real challenge. They want to hang on. The positivism is a belief, is a faith. But as AI explodes and continues to expand, will there come a point when they can no longer hang on to that? They still can, but at some point down the road, maybe not too far, it just becomes absurd to hang on to that belief.
Yeah, I think they're going to find themselves in classrooms trying to teach what they teach, and the students are going to be going, "Why aren't we just asking AI?" And
Right.
eventually, it's going to get to the point where that's why I say, we're getting closer to an inflection point, in which the point at which the people who practice the AI is going to be a better competitor than they are, and then they're going to have to eventually give up. And at that point, they're going to need an alternative. And to me, the alternative for them as well is the interpretive approach.
Well, I'm inclined to say that this was a very good presentation, an important contribution to our topics that we have online. So I'd like to thank you for that. And I would like to thank the other participants for the interesting discussion, the points raised, the issues interpreted. And we could leave it there with a good.
Yeah, thanks for organizing, Frank.
Thank you.
Okay.
It was a
Bye-bye.
pleasure to talk to you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Very
you.
interesting.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.